Everything you believe about the world's most famous sword is a lie. The story of the boy who pulled a magnificent blade from a stone to become king. That sword was not Excalibur. That was a different sword entirely. A political prop. A piece of theater designed to fool an entire kingdom. The real Excalibur has a story far stranger, far more terrifying, and far more important than a simple test of royalty. Its origin lies not in a stone in a churchyard, but in the depths of a mystical lake, gifted by an otherworldly being. And the reason these two stories, the story of the sword in the stone and the story of Excalibur, were deliberately fused together over the centuries, is part of one of the greatest cover-ups in history. A deception created to hide a dangerous truth about the sword's true power. A power that wasn't meant to anoint a king, but to break the very laws of reality itself. So the question we must ask is not who was worthy of wielding Excalibur, but what was Excalibur truly for? And what ancient, terrifying force did its creators truly serve? To understand the secret, we have to go back. Not to the shining castles and chivalrous knights of storybooks, but to the real Britain of the 5th century. This wasn't Camelot. This was a failed state, a ghost of an empire. For 400 years, Rome had ruled Britain. They built roads, forts, cities. They imposed order with the merciless edge of their legions. But the empire was crumbling. The legions were called home, sailing away to defend a dying Rome, and they never came back. They left behind a power vacuum, and nature and human nature abhors a vacuum. Imagine a world where the lights go out everywhere all at once. The infrastructure that held society together for generations, the law, the military, the economy, it all vanished. Britain plunged into a darkness so profound it would last for centuries. It became a fractured, blood-soaked land. Petty kings and brutal warlords carved out their own little fiefdoms from the corpse of the Roman province. They were not noble men. They were gangsters fighting over the scraps of a collapsed civilization. And into this chaos, a new terror was rising from the east. The Saxons. They came first as raiders, then as invaders, then as settlers. They were relentless pagan warriors who saw this broken land ripe for the conquest. They burned the Roman villas, they slaughtered the Romano-British people, and they pushed the survivors further and further west into the mountains of Wales and the peninsula of Cornwall. This was the world that needed a hero. Not a king in a golden crown, but a warlord. A commander who could unite the squabbling British tribes against a common enemy. A man who could forge a nation in the fires of war. This is the historical seed of the man we call Arthur. He wasn't born a king. In the earliest Welsh poems, he is described as a dux bellorum, a duke of battles, a brilliant, savage, and effective military commander who led the British resistance. But brilliance on the battlefield wasn't enough. In a land of 100 self-proclaimed kings, how do you convince them to follow you? How do you create a symbol of unity powerful enough to overcome generations of jealousy and mistrust? You don't win their loyalty, you manufacture a miracle. And this is where another figure steps out of the shadows. A man who is perhaps more important to the legend than Arthur himself. Merlin. Forget the image of a bumbling old wizard with a pointy hat. The Merlin of the original legends was a terrifying and ambiguous figure. A prophet, a political strategist, a master of deception. He was said to be the son of a demon and a mortal woman. A man who walked the line between worlds, who could see the threads of fate and was not afraid to pull them. He understood that the desperate, superstitious people of Britain didn't need another warlord. They needed a messiah. They needed a sign from God. Or if a sign from God wasn't available, Merlin would create one. The plan was a masterstroke of political theater. In the heart of Londinium, the old Roman capital, a great stone appeared in the courtyard of a church. Embedded deep within it was a beautiful sword. Inscribed on the stone, or perhaps on the pommel of the sword itself, were words to the effect of, "Whoso pulleth this sword from this stone is rightwise born king of all England." It was a challenge, a divine test. One by one, the most powerful warlords and nobles in the land came to try their hand. They were the strongest men in Britain, warriors who had lived their lives by the sword. They pulled, they heaved, they strained until their muscles burned and their veins stood out on their foreheads. But the sword would not move. Not a fraction of an inch. It was a public humiliation, a demonstration that their brute strength, their claims of noble blood, meant nothing. And then a young boy, a squire named Arthur, steps forward. He wasn't there to claim a throne. The story goes he was simply trying to find a sword for his foster brother, Sir Kay, who had forgotten his own. He saw the blade in the stone, and with an innocent, effortless pull, he drew it free. The crowd was stunned into silence, then erupted. The warlords were furious, claiming it was a trick. But the common people, tired of war and chaos, saw what Merlin wanted them to see. They saw a miracle. They saw their divinely chosen king. This sword, the sword in the stone, was called Caliburnus in the earliest texts. It was a symbol. It was Merlin's proof of concept. It served its purpose perfectly. It united the factions behind a single leader, a young unknown boy who, conveniently, had no existing loyalties or political baggage. A king that Merlin could guide, shape, and control. This sword was never about magic. It was about propaganda. It was the most successful public relations campaign in the history of the Dark Ages. Arthur, the boy no one knew, was now Arthur, the High King of the Britons. He had the sword, he had the crown, and he had the will of the people. And with that newfound power, he rode out to meet the Saxon invaders in his first great test as king. He rode into the Battle of Bedegraine, a massive, desperate clash of armies. He fought with the fury of a man with everything to prove, his divine sword Caliburnus flashing in the sun. And in the heat of the battle, as he struck a blow against another king, his sword, the sacred sword from the stone, the symbol of his divine right to rule, shattered. It broke in his hands, leaving him disarmed and vulnerable in the middle of a raging battle. The miracle was broken. The symbol of his legitimacy lay in pieces at his feet. In that single moment, Arthur wasn't just a king in peril. His entire kingdom was on the verge of collapse. The proof of his divinity was a fraud. And as his enemies closed in, he was saved not by a miracle, but by his men. But the damage was done. The word would spread. The king's magic sword was just a piece of steel. His claim to the throne was now as broken as his blade. And it is here, in this moment of absolute failure and despair, that our true story begins. Because Merlin, the grand strategist, knew this would happen. The sword in the stone was just the opening act. It was designed to create a king, but it was never the weapon that would allow him to win a war. For that, Arthur would need something more. Something not of this world. With his kingdom hanging by a thread, Arthur was led by Merlin away from the world of men, away from the politics and the battlefields, to the edge of a vast, misty lake. He was about to be introduced to a power far older and more dangerous than any earthly king. He was about to receive a weapon not forged by man, but by magic itself. He was about to receive the real sword of power. He was about to receive Excalibur. The shame was a physical weight upon the young king. The sword from the stone, the very symbol of his divine right to rule, lay shattered at his feet, broken in a rash and ignoble duel against King Pellinore. In that moment, Arthur was not a king chosen by God, but a boy who had broken his most precious possession. His knights looked on, their faith shaken. His enemies, for a moment, saw not a prophesied ruler, but a mortal, fallible youth. As Pellinore stood over him, ready to deliver the final blow, Merlin intervened, casting a spell of sleep upon the rival king. But the damage was done. The symbol was broken. The magic, it seemed, had failed. Merlin led the despondent Arthur away from the battlefield, not back toward the courts of men, but deeper into the wild, untamed heart of Britain. They walked for what felt like days, through ancient forests where the trees had stood since before the Romans, their branches like gnarled fingers grasping at the sky. They crossed misty moors where the silence was so profound it felt like a presence, a living entity watching them pass. This was Merlin's world, a world of old names and older power, a world that hummed with an energy that most men had long forgotten how to feel. Arthur, lost in his own failure, barely noticed the landscape shifting around him, the air growing thick with an unseen force. He was a king without a sword, a leader without his proof. What was he now? Finally, they came to a place that felt like the edge of the world. A vast, unnaturally still lake. Its surface like a sheet of polished obsidian, reflecting the bruised purple and gray of the twilight sky with perfect, eerie clarity. There was no ripple, no whisper of wind across its face. The very air seemed to hold its breath. This was the Lake of Avalon, a place that was not entirely of this world, a gateway between the mortal realm and the mystical land of the Fae, the and of the old Celtic myths. It was a place of immense power, and it had a guardian. Merlin called out, his voice not in the tongue of men, but in a language of whispers and echoes, a tongue as old as the stones and the water. He was not commanding but requesting an audience with the power that resided within. For a long moment nothing happened. The silence deepened, pressing in on Arthur, making the hairs on his arms stand up. And then the surface of the lake broke. But it wasn't a fish or a ripple from a thrown stone. It was a hand. An arm draped in the finest, whitest samite silk rose from the depths without a single splash. The water did not churn or bubble. It simply parted, as if acknowledging a superior presence. The hand was slender, elegant, and impossibly pale, and in its grasp it held a sword. This was not a crude weapon of iron forged in the fires of man. This was something else entirely. The blade seemed to be forged from concentrated moonlight, shimmering with an ethereal glow that pulsed with a life of its own. Along its length, intricate golden runes were inlaid, shifting and glowing faintly as if they were breathing. The crossguard was fashioned of gold, worked into the shape of two intertwined dragons, their tiny eyes made of gemstones that glittered in the fading light. But it was the scabbard that was perhaps even more wondrous. It was crafted from leather of an unknown creature, dyed a deep midnight blue and adorned with silver and jewels that seemed to capture and hold the starlight. It radiated a quiet, protective energy, a warmth that contrasted with the cold, deadly light of the blade itself. This was the work of the Lady of the Lake, a being as old and mysterious as the waters she inhabited. Some called her Nimue, others Vivian. Was she a goddess from a forgotten pantheon? A queen of the fair folk? A sorceress whose power rivaled even Merlin's? No one truly knew. She was a primal force, the living spirit of the sacred waters of Britain, and she was the keeper of its greatest treasures. From the mists at the center of the lake, a figure began to glide toward them, moving across the water as if it were solid ground. It was the lady herself, her form shimmering and indistinct, her face a mask of serene, timeless beauty and immense power. Her eyes held the depth of the lake itself, and in them, Arthur saw a wisdom that predated any kingdom of man. She spoke, her voice not a sound that traveled through the air, but a thought that blossomed directly in Arthur's mind. She offered him the sword. She called it Excalibur, forged in the fires of Avalon, cooled in the breath of a dragon, tempered with spells that could cleave not just steel, but the very fabric of enchantment itself. It was a sword for a true king, a king who would unite the land and rule with justice. But such a gift would not be given freely. The old magic always demanded a balance. She told Arthur that the sword was his to wield, to defend his people and build his kingdom. In return, she would one day ask a favor of him, a boon that he must grant, no matter the cost. Lost in the awe of the moment, seeing his destiny reforged and handed to him from the water itself, Arthur agreed without hesitation. He waded into the cold, still water, took the legendary blade and its scabbard from the unearthly hand, and as he did, the arm slid back beneath the surface, leaving not a single ripple behind. As Arthur returned to the shore, clutching the weapon that felt both impossibly light and heavy with the weight of destiny, Merlin looked at him with a grave expression. "My king," he said, his voice low and serious, "you have been given a great gift. Tell me, which do you find more valuable, the sword or the scabbard?" Arthur, mesmerized by the glowing blade, answered without a thought, "The sword, of course, for with it, I can defeat any enemy." Merlin shook his head, a flicker of disappointment in his ancient eyes. "You are a fool, Arthur. The blade is for taking life, but the scabbard, so long as you wear it, you shall never lose a drop of blood, no matter how grievous your wounds. You will be protected from all harm. The power to preserve your own life is far greater than the power to take another's. Guard the scabbard with your life, for it is your life. Lose it, and you lose everything." This was the true gift of the lake. Not just the power to conquer, but the power to endure. Arthur finally understood. He buckled the scabbard to his waist and slid Excalibur home. The moment the sword rested in its sheath, a wave of vitality and strength washed over him. The shame of his earlier defeat vanished, replaced by a profound sense of purpose and invincibility. When he and Merlin returned to the court, the sight of him struck everyone dumb. He no longer looked like a boy who had stumbled into a crown. He stood taller, his eyes blazing with a newfound confidence. And the sword at his hip, it wasn't just a weapon, it was a declaration. It pulsed with a light that was not of this world, a visible aura of raw, untamed magic. No one dared question his right to rule now. The sword from the stone had proven his bloodline. But Excalibur, a gift from the very soul of the land itself, proved his destiny. It was a power far greater than any earthly claim. It was the mandate of magic, the will of the island of Britain made manifest in steel and enchantment. Arthur was no longer just the boy king. He was the High King, the bearer of Excalibur, and now his real war was about to begin. His enemies were gathering, believing him to be weakened and his symbol broken. They had no idea what was coming for them. They had no idea what power was about to be unleashed when that legendary blade was drawn in anger for the very first time. They saw a boy king with a broken toy, a lucky commoner whose magic had finally run out. The sword in the stone, the very symbol of his divine right to rule, now lay in two pieces, shattered in a common brawl. To the rebels, the coalition of 11 kings led by the formidable King Lot of Orkney, this was no mere accident. It was an omen. The land itself was rejecting this upstart. They gathered their armies, their banners snapping in the wind, confident that the brief, strange reign of Arthur was already over. A king is more than a man. He is a symbol, and a broken symbol is an invitation for wolves to feast. In the halls of Camelot, a shadow of despair had fallen. Knights who had pledged their loyalty now looked at their young king with doubt in their eyes. The whispers in the corridors were venomous, questioning if the miracle at the stone was a fluke, a trick of the wizard Merlin. Arthur himself felt the weight of it all. The sting of his failure, the shame of his broken sword, was a heavier burden than any crown. He had proven himself unworthy. But Merlin, his eyes ancient and seeing far beyond the present moment, felt no despair. He saw not an end but a necessary breaking. The first sword, the one from the stone, had served its purpose. It was a key designed to unlock a door and prove a lineage. It was a tool of politics and prophecy, a symbol for the eyes of men. But it was never meant to be the sword of a true king. It was never meant to win a war against the encroaching darkness. For that, Arthur needed something more. He needed a weapon not of the earth but of the other world. The wizard approached the young king, his voice low and steady amidst the rising panic of the court. He spoke not of armies or strategies but of a journey, a pilgrimage to a place that existed on no map, a place where the veil between the world of mortals and the realm of magic was thin as a spider's thread. He spoke of the Lake of Avalon. To the knights it sounded like madness, fleeing the capital on the eve of war to chase one of the wizard's fairy tales. But Arthur, with nothing left to lose and a sliver of trust in the man who had guided him this far, agreed. Under the cloak of a moonless night, the king and his mentor slipped out of the city, two lone figures riding towards an uncertain dawn. Their journey was not one of miles but of passage. The further they rode from the world of men, the more the world itself seemed to change. The familiar forests of Britain grew strange and silent, the trees ancient and watchful. The air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something wild and timeless. Mists rose from the ground, not the cold, wet fog of morning, but a shimmering silver vapor that seemed to glow with its own internal light. They rode through valleys where the stones hummed with a forgotten energy and crossed streams whose water ran so clear it seemed like liquid starlight. There were no birds, no sound of animals in the brush. There was only the sound of their horses' hooves on the mossy ground and a profound, listening silence. This was the entrance to Avalon, the Isle of Apples, the final resting place of heroes and the domain of powers older than any kingdom of men. Merlin was not leading Arthur to a place, he was guiding him through a gateway. Finally they came to a clearing, and there it was, the lake. It was vast, its waters a sheet of polished obsidian under the strange pearlescent sky. The water did not reflect the clouds or the trees. It held its own light, a deep, internal luminescence that seemed to shift and breathe. The mist coiled upon its surface like sleeping serpents, and the air was so still it felt like the world was holding its breath. This was a place of immense power, a place that could unmake a man as easily as it could crown him. Arthur dismounted, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt like an intruder, a mortal trespasser in a sacred place. He looked at Merlin, but the wizard simply nodded towards the water's edge. As Arthur stepped forward, a ripple disturbed the perfect stillness of the lake. It spread outwards not from a stone or a breeze, but from the very center. And then she appeared. She did not rise from the depths so much as she simply was. One moment there was only water, the next, a figure stood upon its surface, her form woven from mist and moonlight. the Lady of the Lake. She was beautiful, but it was a terrifying inhuman beauty. Her eyes held the wisdom of ages, and her presence radiated a power that made the very air crackle. She was not a queen of men, but a primordial force of nature itself. Her voice was not a sound that entered the ears, but a thought that blossomed directly in the mind. It was the whisper of wind through reeds and the crash of a distant waterfall all at once. She addressed Arthur not as a boy, but as the Pendragon, the prophesied king. She spoke of his destiny, of the great and terrible war that was to come, a war for the very soul of Britain. She knew of his broken sword, his broken confidence, and she offered him a choice. As she spoke, the water before her began to churn. Slowly, majestically, an arm rose from the depths. It was clad in the purest white samite, a sleeve of shimmering unearthly silk, and in its hand it held a sword. Arthur gasped. He had never seen anything like it. The sword from the stone had been a fine weapon, but this was something else entirely. It was not a sword of men. The blade was pale, seeming to have been forged from a captured moonbeam, and along its length faint runes pulsed with a soft blue light. The crossguard was silver, shaped like two great dragons, their wings unfurled. The hilt was wrapped in deep blue leather, and the pommel was a single flawless sapphire that seemed to contain a swirling galaxy within its depths. The sword hummed not with a sound, but with a feeling, a vibration of immense power that resonated deep in Arthur's bones. This was a promise forged in starlight, a weapon meant to cleave not just flesh and bone, but shadows and despair. This was Excalibur. The Lady of the Lake explained that the sword was forged in the dragon's fire of Avalon, cooled in the waters of creation, and enchanted with spells that would protect its wielder and shatter the weapons of his enemies. Could cut through iron as if it were wood. It was a kingmaker, a nation forger. It was his if he was worthy to take it. Arthur, mesmerized, took a step into the shallows of the lake, his eyes fixed on the legendary blade. But Merlin placed a hand on his shoulder, his grip firm. "Ask her of the scabbard," the wizard whispered, his voice urgent. Arthur, confused but trusting, turned back to the lady and asked of the scabbard. A slow, knowing smile touched the lady's lips. She gestured, and beside the sword, a scabbard of incredible craftsmanship rose from the water. It was made of dark wood and bound in gold, intricately carved with symbols of protection and preservation. "The sword is a mighty thing, Arthur Pendragon," her voice echoed in his mind. "It will bring you great victories and make your name a legend. But the scabbard is 10 times more valuable." She explained that while he wore the scabbard, he would never shed a drop of blood. No matter how grievous the wound, he could not be mortally harmed. The blade was for his enemies. The scabbard was for his kingdom. For as long as the king was protected, the kingdom could not fall. It was a test, a choice between the power to destroy and the power to preserve. The young warrior heart in Arthur screamed to take the blade, to feel its perfect balance, to wield its awesome power. But the nascent king within him, the man who was beginning to understand the burden of his crown, recognized the deeper truth. He reached out, his hand steady, and took the scabbard first. The Lady of the Lake smiled, a true and radiant smile this time. The test was passed. He then took the hilt of Excalibur. The moment his fingers closed around it, a shock of pure energy surged through him. It was not a weapon he was holding, it was a destiny. The power of the land, the magic of Avalon, the hope of a nation. It all flowed into him. The doubt, the fear, the shame of his broken past was burned away in that single brilliant moment. He waded back to the shore, holding the sword in its scabbard, his eyes shining with a new unshakable resolve. He was no longer the boy who pulled a sword from a stone. He was Arthur, King of the Britons, wielder of Excalibur. He turned his gaze from the mystical lake back towards the world of men, towards the gathering armies of King Lot. They believed they were marching on a broken boy. They were about to face a living legend. The fields before the castle of Bedegraine were a sea of steel and resentment. 11 kings, a confederation of the most powerful men in Britain, had brought their armies to crush the boy who dared to call himself High King. Their banners snapped in the wind, a forest of dragons, bears, and wolves, each promising a bloody end to the dream of Camelot. King Lot of Orkney, a man whose ambition was as sharp as his axe, surveyed the scene with a grim smile. Against his thousands of seasoned warriors, what chance did a boy with a few loyal knights and a handful of hastily gathered soldiers have? It was to be a slaughter. A lesson. Inside the castle walls, the mood was dire. Arthur's allies, King Ban and King Bors, veterans of 100 wars, looked out at the enemy host and saw only an ending. They had pledged their swords to this young man, but faith was a fragile shield against such overwhelming odds. They advised a tactical retreat, a clandestine escape in the night. To stay and fight was suicide. Arthur listened, his face pale but his eyes burning with a strange fire. He had not drawn a sword from a stone. He had not been gifted a blade by a mystical lady, only to flee at the first shadow of a true challenge. He would not run. He would not hide. He would be the king they needed, or he would die a king. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of blood and iron, the horns of the rebel kings sounded their challenge. The ground itself seemed to tremble as their massive army began its advance. Arthur's men formed their lines, their hearts hammering against their ribs. They saw the endless ranks marching towards them, and they felt the cold grip of despair. They were not fighting for a kingdom, they were fighting to survive the next hour. Arthur rode before them, his armor plain, his face still boyish. He raised his sword, the one he had drawn from the stone, but it offered little comfort against the tide of death that was about to crash over them. The clash was titanic, a roar of fury and pain as the two armies met. The smaller force of Arthur's loyalists buckled instantly under the sheer weight of the assault. Shields splintered. Lines broke. Men screamed and fell, swallowed by the chaos. King Lot's warriors pressed forward relentless, sensing a swift and brutal victory. Arthur fought like a cornered lion, his sword a blur, but for every man he cut down, 3 more took his place. He was being pushed back, his forces shrinking, the dream of a united Britain dissolving in a spray of gore. This was it, the end of the story before it had even truly begun. And then Merlin appeared at his side, his eyes seeming to hold the storm of the battle within them. He was not a warrior, but his voice cut through the din. "The time has come, Arthur," he said, his voice calm amidst the madness. "The sword from the stone proved you were born to be king. Now show them the sword that proves you are chosen by heaven itself." Arthur knew. He sheathed the common sword at his side and reached over his shoulder, his hand closing around a different hilt. A hilt wrapped in blue leather, cool to the touch. He drew it from its scabbard. He drew Excalibur. It wasn't a flash of light. It was an explosion. A nova. As the blade cleared its sheath, it erupted with a pure white brilliance that was not of this world. It shone with the light of 30 torches, a searing holy fire that bleached the color from the sky. The bloody, mud-caked battlefield was suddenly illuminated as if by a falling star. Every soldier on that field, friend and foe alike, stopped dead. They threw their hands up to shield their eyes from the impossible glare. The roar of battle died, replaced by 1,000 gasps of awe and terror. In the center of it all stood Arthur, no longer a boy, but a figure of myth. The light emanated from the blade in his hand, casting his face in an otherworldly glow. He was the vessel for this divine power. The enemy soldiers whose seconds before had been howling for his blood, now fell back, stumbling over each other. They were not looking at a king, they were looking at an angel of vengeance. King Lot, his eyes wide with disbelief, saw his men falter. What sorcery was this? What trickery could conjure such a terrifying spectacle? Arthur's own men stared, their fear replaced by a sudden, surging wave of hope that was so powerful it felt like a physical blow. This was their king. This was the sign they had prayed for. A roar went up from their ranks, a sound of renewed faith and furious loyalty. Arthur raised Excalibur high, the blade cutting a brilliant arc through the air. And then he spurred his horse forward, straight into the heart of the stunned and terrified enemy army. He did not ride alone. His knights, their spirits ignited by the miracle they had just witnessed, charged with him. They crashed into the enemy line not as a desperate band of survivors, but as an unstoppable force of nature. Arthur was the tip of the spear. Excalibur was no longer just a sword. It was an extension of his will, a conduit of righteous power. It rose and fell, and with every swing the blinding light pulsed, sowing confusion and panic. Enemy soldiers didn't even try to fight back. They broke and ran, screaming of demons and magic. They had come to kill a boy, and they had found themselves fighting against the sun itself. The battle became a rout. The most powerful army in Britain was shattered, not by tactics or numbers, but by the sheer undeniable power of a single blade. Arthur and his knights pursued them relentlessly, their victory absolute. The 11 rebel kings, including the proud King Lot, were forced into a humiliating retreat, their armies scattered, their pride broken. They had witnessed something that day that defied all logic, something that shook the very foundations of their world. They had seen the power of a true king. In the aftermath, as the sun set on a field littered with the cost of his victory, Arthur stood alone, his breathing heavy. Excalibur was now quiet in his hand. Its light faded to a soft ethereal shimmer. The weight of what had happened, the lives lost, the power he now wielded settled upon him. This was the burden of the crown. Merlin found him there, his expression unreadable. "You fought well," the wizard said simply. Arthur looked at the sword, then at Merlin. "This blade, it is more than just steel. It is a promise forged in Avalon," Merlin replied. "It promises victory to the one who wields it in a just cause. But the sword is not the greatest gift you received from the Lady of the Lake." Arthur frowned, confused. What could be greater than this? He held up Excalibur, its beauty still breathtaking even in the fading light. Merlin pointed to the empty scabbard hanging at Arthur's hip. It was simple, made of dark blue leather and adorned with subtle, intricate patterns. It seemed plain, unremarkable, especially compared to the legendary blade it was meant to hold. "That," Merlin said, his voice low and serious, "the scabbard. It is 10 times more valuable than the sword itself." Arthur looked from the magnificent weapon to the plain sheath. It made no sense. How can that be? This is just leather and thread. The sword is a gift from the gods. Merlin's eyes grew dark, filled with the weight of prophecy. "Listen to me, Arthur, and listen well. So long as you wear that scabbard, you shall lose no blood. No matter how grievous the wound, you will not bleed. You cannot be weakened. You cannot be slain by inches. The sword makes you a conqueror, but the scabbard makes you invincible." A chill ran down Arthur's spine that had nothing to do with the evening air. Invincible. The word hung between them, filled with terrifying possibility. To be a king who could not fall in battle, who could lead every charge without fear of death. It was a power beyond imagining. He looked at the scabbard with new eyes, seeing not just leather, but a life charm of immense power. "So I must guard it," Arthur said, his voice a whisper. "Guard it with my life." Merlin nodded slowly. "More than your life, boy. For while the sword can win you a kingdom, the loss of that scabbard will surely cost you one." And with Merlin's words hanging in the cold air, a shadow of doubt fell over the young king's triumph. More than his life. The scabbard wasn't just a shield, it was the very anchor of his reign, a fragile thread from which the fate of Britain now hung. Arthur gripped the sword in one hand and the ornate sheath in the other. One was a promise of victory, the other a warning of utter ruin. He slid Excalibur back into its home, the whisper of steel on leather a solemn vow. He would not fail. He could not. Word of the new king and his divine sword spread like wildfire. To the north, a coalition of 11 powerful kings, rulers of ancient bloodlines, refused to bend the knee. They saw not a prophesied savior, but a boy, an upstart with a magic trick, a puppet of the sorcerer Merlin. They amassed their armies, a great tide of iron and fury, ready to sweep down and crush this nascent kingdom before it could truly take root. They were wrong. What they met on the battlefield of Bedegrain was not a boy, but a force of nature. Arthur, mounted on his warhorse, was a blur of righteous fury, and in his hand Excalibur was not merely steel. When he drew it from its scabbard, it blazed with the light of 30 torches, a blinding, holy fire that seared the eyes of his enemies and filled the hearts of his men with a courage they had never known. The sword was an extension of his will. It moved with impossible speed, a silver comet carving through enemy lines. It shattered shields, split helms, and cut through the finest mail as if it were cloth. But it was the scabbard, buckled securely at his side, that worked the true miracle. Lances splintered against his armor without leaving a scratch. Swords swung by giant chieftains glanced off him as if he were made of stone. Arrows seemed to divert in midair. He waded into the thickest, most desperate fighting, a lone figure in a maelstrom of death, and emerged every time without a single wound. Not a cut, not a bruise. His knights saw it and called it divine protection. His enemies saw it and called it dark sorcery. Arthur began to believe it was simply his destiny. Victory followed victory. The alliance of 11 kings was shattered, their armies broken and scattered. The Saxons, pressing in from the east, were driven back to the sea in a series of brilliant lightning-fast campaigns. With every battle won, the legend grew. Arthur the Invincible, Arthur the Unwounded King. He was no longer just the boy who pulled the sword from the stone. He was the living embodiment of victory. And slowly, subtly, a change began to work its way into the king's heart. The awe he once felt for the Lady of the Lake's gifts began to fade, replaced by a comfortable familiarity. The fear instilled by Merlin's warning receded, replaced by the unshakable confidence of a man who has never known defeat. He started to see the scabbard less as a sacred trust to be guarded, and more as a tool to be used, an extension of his own innate greatness. He was the great king after all. Of course he was invincible. The magic was not a gift, but a reflection of his own worthiness. Pride, the most insidious of poisons, began to seep into his veins. Merlin saw it. The wise old sorcerer saw the boy he had mentored becoming a man, but also a king growing dangerously accustomed to his own myth. He saw Arthur taking greater and greater risks in battle, relying not on strategy, but on the simple, brutal fact that he could not be harmed. He cautioned the king, reminded him that the magic was not his own, that it was a loan from powers far older and greater than any mortal man. But Arthur, flushed with success and the adoration of his people, would just smile, clap his mentor on the shoulder, and ride off to another seemingly impossible victory. His success had made him deaf to the warnings of the very man who had engineered it. And in the shadows, another power was watching. A power fueled by jealousy, bitterness, and a magic as old and as potent as Merlin's, but twisted by a thirst for vengeance. Morgan Le Fay, Arthur's half-sister, daughter of the same mother, Igraine, but sired by another man before Uther Pendragon's deception. She had grown up in the shadow of a prophecy that was not her own, watching as the son of her mother's conqueror was given a kingdom she felt was her birthright. She was a sorceress of incredible skill, taught by Merlin himself in her youth before her heart soured and her ambition turned dark. She saw Arthur's invincibility not as a blessing, but as an obscene cheat. She saw Excalibur's light not as holy, but as an arrogant fire that needed to be extinguished. And she heard the whispers about the scabbard, the true source of his power. While others plotted to defeat Arthur in the field, Morgan knew the truth. You don't fight a miracle, you steal it. Her first attempt was a test of both Arthur's skill and his arrogance. She took a loyal knight, Sir Accolon, a man who loved her deeply, and armed him with a sword she had enchanted. It was a perfect replica of Excalibur, forged in fairy fire, indistinguishable from the true blade. Then, through a series of magical tricks and illusions, she engineered a situation where Arthur and Accolon would fight, but not before she secretly swapped their swords. Arthur, believing he was entering a friendly joust, found himself armed with a useless copy, while Accolon wielded the true Excalibur, its power flowing through him. The fight was brutal. For the first time in his life, Arthur felt the jarring shock of a blade that didn't shatter. He felt his own sword, the fake, chip and blunt against Accolon's relentless assault. He was wounded, a deep cut on his arm, then another on his leg. Blood, his own blood, stained his armor for the first time since becoming king. He was confused, shocked. How could this be? His men watched in horror as their invincible king was beaten back, step by step, bleeding and exhausted. But Morgan had made one critical miscalculation. She had managed to swap the swords, but she had not been able to steal the scabbard. And as long as Arthur wore it, he could not be killed. Though he bled, his wounds were not fatal. Though he tired, his life force would not drain away. The scabbard kept him standing, kept him fighting, fueled by sheer grit and disbelief. In the end, through a desperate final surge of strength, Arthur managed to disarm Accolon, reclaiming the true Excalibur. The moment his hand closed around its hilt, the familiar power surged back into him, the blinding light flared, and the fight was over. He had won. But he was wounded and for the first time deeply shaken. He had nearly been killed. When the truth of Morgan's deception was revealed, Arthur was filled with a righteous fury. Yet he missed the true lesson. Instead of recognizing his vulnerability and the absolute necessity of the scabbard, he saw the event as a testament to his own peerless strength. He had won even without Excalibur. He had faced down his sister's dark magic and triumphed. His pride, rather than being humbled, was inflamed. Morgan Le Fay, however, learned her lesson perfectly. She had failed, but she had also succeeded. She had confirmed the source of his power. It wasn't the sword. It was the scabbard. The sword was a symbol, a magnificent weapon, but the scabbard was life itself. And she now knew that a direct confrontation, even with magic, was a fool's errand. She needed guile. She needed to get close. So she changed her tactics. She sent emissaries to Camelot, begging for forgiveness. She claimed she had been misled by evil counsel, that her love for her brother had been twisted by grief and jealousy. She sent lavish gifts, swore oaths of fealty, and pleaded for a chance to return to court and serve him. Merlin warned him, his voice grave. "A scorpion does not change its nature, my king. It only waits for a better moment to sting." But Arthur, eager to heal the rift in his family, eager to believe in the possibility of redemption, and blinded by his own string of successes, chose to believe her. He saw her apology as another victory, a testament to his own benevolent rule. He welcomed his sister back to Camelot with open arms, giving her a place of honor in his court. He showed the world that the House of Pendragon was united, stronger than ever. And so Morgan Le Fay walked the hallowed halls of Camelot, a serpent in the garden. She smiled, she curtsied, she offered wise counsel. And all the while she watched. She watched Arthur's every move. She noted his habits, his routines. She saw how, at night, when he prepared for sleep, he would unbuckle the scabbard and lay it on a bedside table, within arm's reach but unguarded. He had grown so comfortable, so certain of the safety within his own castle walls, that the most precious object in the kingdom was left protected by nothing more than proximity. Morgan saw it and she smiled. Her moment was coming. The invincible king had a weakness after all: trust. Her plan began not with a clash of steel or a shouted spell, but with the quiet patience of a spider. Morgan Le Fay watched. From the shadows of the court, she observed the rhythms of Camelot, the ebb and flow of power around her half-brother. She saw how the knights revered him, how Guinevere adored him, how the common folk saw him as a living deity. And she saw how he carried Excalibur. He carried it as if it were a part of him, an extension of his own arm. At feasts, it rested in a stand behind his throne. In council, it was laid across the great round table. But it was not always with him. In the deep of night, when the king slept, the sword and its scabbard lay on a velvet cloth beside his bed. When he rode out for a simple pleasure, a hawk on his arm, he often left the greatsword behind, favoring a lighter blade. He was surrounded by the 100 finest knights in Christendom. He was in the heart of the most fortified castle in the world. Who would dare? This was the flaw. This was the crack in the armor of the perfect king. Arthur's strength was the loyalty he inspired, but his weakness was the belief that such loyalty was universal. He could not conceive of the depth of the betrayal festering so close to his heart. Morgan's opportunity came, as they so often do, disguised as a celebration. The court had grown restless with peace, and Arthur, ever keen to the mood of his men, declared a great hunt in the forests of Camelot. It was to be a grand affair, a contest of skill and bravery. Knights would chase the fleet-footed deer and the fearsome wild boar. It was a chance for glory, for camaraderie, a release from the formalities of the court, and it was the perfect distraction. On the eve of the hunt, Morgan moved through the castle like a whisper. She brewed a special wine for the king, a vintage laced with herbs from the old world. Not poison, nothing so crude. Just a potion to weigh down the limbs, to dull the senses, to invite a deep and profound exhaustion that no amount of sleep could truly satisfy. She presented it to him herself, a gesture of sisterly affection. Arthur, seeing only his kin, drank deeply, toasting to the thrill of the chase to come. He slept that night a heavy, dreamless sleep, and awoke feeling as though he'd been carrying a mountain on his shoulders. The morning of the hunt was crisp and bright. The air rang with the baying of hounds and the call of hunting horns. Arthur, despite his weariness, mounted his steed. He was the king, and he would lead. He carried Excalibur at his side, its scabbard gleaming in the morning sun. He felt the familiar weight, the thrum of its power, a comforting presence that seemed to burn away some of his fatigue. They rode into the ancient woods, a sea of green and gold. For hours the hunt was glorious. Arthur's skill was unmatched. His eye was keen, his arm was true. But the potion was a patient poison. As the day wore on, the weariness returned, creeping into his bones. His eyelids grew heavy. The sounds of the forest began to blur. It was then that he saw it. Through a thicket of ancient oaks, a creature of impossible beauty appeared. It was a great white hart, a stag whose coat was the color of fresh snow and whose antlers seemed to be spun from silver. It was a royal beast, a king of the forest, and in that moment, all of Arthur's exhaustion vanished, replaced by the primal fire of the hunter. Shouting to his knights to follow, he spurred his horse, giving chase. The white hart was unnaturally fast. It flowed through the forest, a phantom of white and silver, leading Arthur deeper and deeper into the woods, away from the sounds of the main hunting party. The trees grew thicker, their branches weaving a canopy that blotted out the sun. The air grew still and heavy. Thorns tore at Arthur's cloak, and low-hanging branches nearly unseated him, but his eyes were fixed on his prize. He was alone now. The calls of his knights were gone, swallowed by the oppressive silence of the primeval forest. Finally, after a chase that felt like it lasted an eternity, the stag led him to a small hidden meadow. A gentle stream trickled through it, and the grass was impossibly green. The white hart paused by the water, looked back at Arthur one last time with eyes that seemed to hold an ancient intelligence, and then in a blink it vanished. It didn't run, it simply ceased to be. Arthur sat upon his horse, panting, his heart hammering in his chest. The adrenaline faded, and the magical weariness crashed back over him with the force of a tidal wave. It was overwhelming. He could barely keep his eyes open. Dismounting, he led his horse to the stream. He knelt and drank the cool, clear water. It did nothing to revive him. Seeing the soft grass, he thought only to rest his eyes for a moment. Just a moment. He unbuckled his sword belt, laying the magnificent Excalibur and its even more precious scabbard on the mossy ground beside him. He lay his head down, and the world dissolved into blackness. He did not see the figure that emerged from the shadows of the trees. Morgan Le Fay stepped into the clearing, her movements silent as a cat. She looked down at her brother, his face peaceful in the enchanted slumber she had so carefully orchestrated. There was no triumph in her eyes, only cold, hard purpose. This wasn't about hatred, not entirely. It was about balance. It was about taking back the power she believed was her birthright. She knelt beside him. Her long, slender fingers reached out, not for the sword, but for the scabbard. She knew its secret. She knew it was the real prize. Then, her hands closed around the hilt of Excalibur. She lifted it. The blade, born of magic and tempered by fate, did not gleam in the dappled light. It seemed to absorb it, holding a quiet, deadly power. For a moment, she just held it, feeling the pulse of the dragon's fire within the steel. Then, from the folds of her cloak, she produced another sword and another scabbard. They were perfect copies. Her own enchantments had been at work for months, crafting a flawless imitation. The hilt was identical, the blade had the same balance, the scabbard was adorned with the same jewels. To any eye, even Arthur's, it was Excalibur. But it was a hollow shell. A piece of metal with no soul. A scabbard of leather and gems with no healing magic. It was a lie made manifest. She carefully placed the forgery on the moss where the real one had been. Then, clutching the true Excalibur and its scabbard to her chest, she melted back into the forest, leaving Arthur to his magical sleep, utterly defenseless and completely unaware. Hours later, Arthur awoke with a start. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees. He felt groggy, confused. He remembered the white hart, the chase, the crushing fatigue. He looked beside him and saw his sword, resting peacefully on the grass. He felt a pang of foolishness for having fallen asleep so carelessly. He buckled the sword belt around his waist, the familiar weight a comfort. He called for his horse, mounted, and began the long ride back to find his men. When he finally rejoined his hunting party, they were relieved. They had been searching for him for hours. Arthur laughed it off, telling them a tall tale of the magical stag that led him on a merry chase. No one suspected a thing. He returned to Camelot a hero, as always. He feasted with his knights, the counterfeit Excalibur resting in its stand behind his throne, a silent testament to the greatest deception his kingdom had ever known. The king was safe. His sword was with him. All was right with the world. But far away, in a hidden castle shrouded in mist, Morgan Le Fay was not finished. The theft was only the first step. Possessing the sword was not enough. She had to see it used. She had a champion in mind, a brave and noble knight of the court, a man who loved her without question, Sir Accolon of Gaul. She would give him the real Excalibur. She would give him the healing scabbard. And then, through magic and manipulation, she would arrange a trial by combat. A duel to the death. A duel between Sir Accolon, her champion, and the King of Britain. Morgan's plan was simple, and it was devastating. She would have King Arthur killed with his own sword. The stage for this regicide was not a battlefield or a throne room, but a royal hunt. Arthur, ever the sportsman, rode out from Camelot with a small party. Among them was his nephew, Sir Uwaine, and a knight of the Round Table named Accolon of Gaul. What Arthur didn't know was that Sir Accolon was his sister's secret lover, the chosen instrument of his demise. As they chased a magnificent white hart deep into the forest, a strange, otherworldly mist descended upon them. They became separated, lost in a sudden twilight. Disoriented and weary, they stumbled upon a strange sight. A ship, draped in silks, floating impossibly on a small lake in the heart of the woods. With no other shelter in sight, they boarded the vessel. Inside, a feast was laid out, though no crew was visible. They ate and drank, and a powerful enchantment in the food and wine sent them into a profound, unnatural sleep. When King Arthur awoke, the world had changed. He was no longer on the enchanted ship, but on the cold stone floor of a dungeon. He was a prisoner. He learned from his fellow captives that they were held by a cruel lord named Sir Damas, a man locked in a bitter feud with his younger brother. Damas demanded a trial by combat to settle their dispute, but he was a coward. He needed a champion. He had been imprisoning every knight who passed through his lands, trying to force one to fight for him. All had refused to support such a dishonorable man. Arthur, his identity as king still a secret, listened to their plight. He saw their suffering and knew he couldn't stand by. With the heart of a true king, he agreed to be Damas's champion on one condition: that all 20 knights in the dungeon be freed the moment the duel was over, win or lose. Damas, caring only for his own victory, readily agreed. Meanwhile, Sir Accolon awoke in a lavish bedchamber. Morgan Le Fay was there. She told him a story of a noble quest. He was to fight as a champion for a great lady, herself, against a tyrannical knight who sought to steal her lands. She painted a picture of glory, of honor, of a future where he would be king, with her as his queen. Then she presented him with a gift: a sword and a scabbard. The sword gleamed with an ethereal light, its blade impossibly sharp. The scabbard shimmered, promising protection from any wound. It was Excalibur. Accolon, blinded by love and ambition, accepted it without question. He was to be Morgan's champion, armed with the king's own magical sword, never once suspecting the true identity of the man he was being sent to kill. The final piece of the trap was set when a damsel, an agent of Morgan, arrived at Arthur's prison cell. She brought him his armor and a sword sent, she claimed, from his sister who had learned of his predicament through her magic. Arthur, who still believed in some small goodness within Morgan, felt a surge of gratitude. He took the sword. It was a masterpiece, a perfect copy of Excalibur in every detail. Felt balanced, it looked magnificent. But it was a fraud. A beautiful, brittle fake, forged by dark magic to fail him at his moment of greatest need. He was also given no scabbard. The trap was now perfect. An unsuspecting king, armed with a fake sword and no protection from bleeding, was about to face one of his own knights, who was unknowingly armed with the real, unstoppable Excalibur. The day of the duel arrived. 2 knights, their faces hidden by their helms, rode onto the field. They knew nothing of each other, only that they were champions for opposing sides. The crowd watched as they charged. The sound of their lances shattering against shields echoed across the field. They were thrown from their horses, but both sprang to their feet, drawing their swords. And in that first exchange of steel on steel, Arthur knew something was terribly wrong. His opponent's blade met his shield, and instead of just blocking the blow, the shield was sliced clean in two. The sword cut deep into Arthur's side, and the pain was immediate and shocking. Blood began to flow freely, soaking his armor. He struck back, a powerful blow that should have shattered his enemy's helmet. But his own sword, the fake Excalibur, barely made a dent. With every clash, Arthur felt his strength draining away. His opponent fought with a ferocious energy, his every strike landing with the unstoppable power that Arthur knew so well. It was like fighting a mirror image of himself, but one that was stronger, faster, and invincible. He was bleeding from a dozen wounds. His armor was shredded. His fake sword was chipped and blunted, pieces of it shattering with every parry. He realized with dawning horror that the man he was fighting was wielding Excalibur. The truth of the betrayal hit him like a physical blow. Morgan, this was her doing. She had armed a champion with his own sword to murder him. He fought on, driven by sheer will, but he was losing. Badly. He was brought to his knees, his vision blurring from blood loss. Accolon stood over him, the true Excalibur raised for the final killing strike. This was the end. The dream of Camelot, the hope of Britain, was about to die in the dirt of a dueling field, slain by its own symbol. But the magic of Excalibur was not Morgan's to command alone. Another power was watching. Nimue, the Lady of the Lake, the mystical guardian who had first bestowed the sword upon Arthur, would not allow her gift to be used for such a dark purpose. As Accolon brought the blade down, Nimue's magic intervened. A flash of unseen energy pulsed across the field, and Excalibur was ripped from Accolon's grasp. The sword spun through the air and clattered to the ground, landing just inches from the fallen king. Arthur, seeing his chance, lunged for it. The moment his fingers closed around the familiar hilt, he felt it. Not the cold, dead weight of the fake, but the living hum of true magic. Power surged through him, clearing his mind, numbing the pain. This was his sword. He scrambled to his feet, holding the broken replica in one hand and the true Excalibur in the other. The contrast was absolute. He now understood the full, terrifying depth of his sister's treachery. Fueled by righteous fury, Arthur attacked. Now the roles were reversed. Accolon, suddenly deprived of the magical sword, was confused and terrified. Arthur's blows, now backed by the true Excalibur, were devastating. He battered Accolon's shield, shattered his armor, and drove him back across the field. With a final powerful strike, he sent Accolon's own sword flying and knocked the knight to the ground. Standing over him, Excalibur at his throat, Arthur demanded to know his name. He tore the helmet from his opponent's head. The sight stole his breath. It was Sir Accolon of Gaul, a knight of the Round Table, a man who had sworn an oath of loyalty to him. The betrayal was now personal, intimate, and 1,000 times more painful. Accolon, seeing his king standing over him, battered and bleeding, finally understood the lie he had been fed. He hadn't been fighting for honor or for love. He had been an assassin, a pawn in a plot to commit the ultimate treason. Broken and ashamed, Accolon confessed everything. He told Arthur of his affair with Morgan Le Fay. He revealed her entire monstrous plan, to kill Arthur with his own sword, to murder her husband, King Uriens, and to seize the throne of Britain for herself, with Accolon as her puppet king. The ambition was breathtaking in its evil. Arthur, though gravely wounded, listened to the confession, his heart turning to ice. He had defeated his would-be killer, but the victory felt hollow. The wound from the sword was deep, but the wound of his sister's betrayal was one that might never heal. Sir Accolon, his body broken and his honor destroyed, would die from his injuries 4 days later, a tragic victim of a queen's dark ambition. And Arthur, clutching Excalibur, now knew that the greatest threat to Camelot wasn't a foreign invader or a mythical beast, but the enemy within his own blood. The wound left by Morgan's betrayal was deeper than any blade could inflict. It was a poison in the heart of Camelot, a chilling reminder that the brightest light casts the darkest shadows. For Arthur, the world was no longer simple. The lines between friend and foe, loyalty and treachery, had been blurred by his own sister's hand. The gleam of Excalibur in its scabbard now seemed less a promise of victory, and more a constant, heavy burden. The scabbard protected his body from harm, but what could protect his spirit from the corrosion of doubt? What magic could mend a broken trust? Camelot mourned Sir Balin, a knight whose tragic fate was a testament to the chaos Morgan had unleashed. But kings do not have the luxury of grief. While Arthur wrestled with the demons of his own house, a new threat, vast and ancient, was stirring on the continent. A shadow that had once stretched over Britain and never truly forgotten its claim. The Roman Empire. For generations, Britain had stood independent, a flickering flame of freedom on the edge of a world dominated by Rome. But now a new ambitious emperor sat on the throne in the Eternal City, Lucius Tiberius. He saw Arthur not as a fellow sovereign, but as a rebellious provincial governor. He saw Camelot not as a beacon of chivalry, but as a wealthy territory that had for too long neglected its duties to the true masters of the world. An embassy arrived, not with offers of friendship or alliance, but with a cold, imperious demand. They carried scrolls bearing the seal of the Senate and people of Rome, and their message was simple: Britain was to pay tribute, a fortune in gold, silver, and livestock, an acknowledgement of Roman supremacy. To refuse was to declare war. The emissaries stood in the great hall of Camelot, their arrogance a stark contrast to the heavy silence of the assembled knights of the Round Table. They spoke of legions of unmatched power, of cities razed and kings brought to heel in chains. When they finished, a low murmur rippled through the hall. Some of the older lords, who remembered the stories of Roman rule, shifted uneasily. But the younger knights, men like Lancelot, Gawain, and Percival, bristled with indignation. Their hands drifted to the hilts of their swords. They looked to their king. Arthur sat on his throne, his face a mask of calm, but his knuckles were white where he gripped its carved arms. He had fought Saxon invaders, rogue knights, and mythical beasts. He had faced down the enchantments of his own sister. But this was different. This was the weight of history, the might of an empire that had conquered the known world. To defy Rome was to invite annihilation. To submit, however, was to betray everything Camelot stood for. It was to admit that the dream of a free and just Britain, united under one king, was nothing more than a fleeting fantasy, easily snuffed out by an old power. He rose to his feet. The hall fell silent. He did not look at the Roman emissaries. He looked at his knights, his friends, his brothers in arms. He spoke, his voice not loud, but carrying to every corner of the chamber, filled with a resolve forged in the crucible of betrayal and loss. He told them that freedom was not a gift to be given by an emperor, but a right to be defended with blood and steel. He said that the tribute Rome demanded was not gold, but their honor, their sovereignty, their very soul. And then he drew Excalibur. The blade hissed from its scabbard, and the hall was filled with a light so brilliant it was as if the sun had burst through the ceiling. It was a light that burned away doubt and fear, a light that reflected in the wide eyes of every knight present. It was the light of defiance. Arthur's answer to Rome was not given in words, but in the sight of the legendary sword, held aloft, its radiant power a declaration in itself. The message was clear. Britain would not bow. Britain would fight. The war with Rome was not a war to be fought on Britain's shores. Arthur knew he could not wait for the Roman legions to land. He had to take the fight to them. He gathered the greatest army Britain had ever seen. Knights from every corner of the kingdom, from the highlands of the north to the coasts of Cornwall, answered the call. They marched under the banner of the Pendragon, a river of steel and resolve flowing out of Camelot. Their journey took them across the Channel and into Gaul, the heart of Roman-controlled Europe. And it was there, on the coast of Normandy, that Arthur faced a challenge that was not of a legion, but of a single monstrous being. On the tidal island of Mont Saint-Michel, a giant had taken up residence. This was no common brute. He was a fiend from the darkest pits of Spain, a cannibal who terrorized the countryside, feasting on men and carrying off women, including the niece of the local duke. The people lived in constant, abject terror. When Arthur heard the tale, he knew he could not pass by. A king protects his people, but a true king protects all people from such evil. He declared he would face the giant himself. Sir Kay and Sir Bedivere insisted on accompanying him, and so the three of them rode to the island as dusk fell. What they found was a scene from a nightmare. The crackling fires of the giant's camp illuminated the grotesque remains of his victims. And then they saw him. He was a creature of immense size and terrifying strength, his face a twisted mask of pure malevolence, his beard matted with dried blood. He was gnawing on the limb of a man as if it were a chicken leg. Seeing Arthur, he let out a roar of contemptuous laughter and grabbed a massive, crude iron club. He boasted that he would crush Arthur's bones and add his armor to his collection. Kay and Bedivere charged, but they were swatted aside like flies, their shields splintered by the giant's immense power. Arthur alone stood before the monster. This was not a battle of armies, but a primal contest of hero against monster, of light against an ancient darkness. The giant swung his club, a blow that could shatter granite, but Arthur was impossibly fast. The magical scabbard of Excalibur glowed at his side, and the monster's blow, which should have pulverized him, glanced off an unseen field of force, leaving him unharmed. The giant roared in frustration, swinging again and again, his rage making him clumsy. Arthur weaved and dodged, a blur of motion in the firelight. He was waiting for his moment, for the one opening he needed. The giant, enraged by this small human who refused to be crushed, lunged forward, his guard completely down. That was the moment. Arthur surged forward, not with a wild swing, but with the precision of a master swordsman. Excalibur became a streak of light. The blade, forged in Avalon, met the giant's thick, leathery hide and cut through it as if it were silk. Arthur didn't just strike. He moved with a dancer's grace and a predator's lethality, Excalibur an extension of his will. He severed the monster's leg at the knee, bringing the colossus crashing to the ground with a sound like a falling oak tree. The giant bellowed in agony and rage, trying to crawl towards Arthur, but the king showed no mercy. He raised Excalibur high, its light a beacon of righteous fury in the dark night. With one final powerful strike, he brought the sword down, ending the monster's reign of terror forever. The victory at Mont Saint-Michel sent a shockwave through Gaul. This was the king of the Britons? This was the man who dared to defy Rome? He was not just a king. He was a hero, a dragon slayer, a giant killer. Soldiers and common folk alike whispered his name in awe. His legend was growing, preceding his army like a vanguard of hope. But Emperor Lucius was not impressed by fables. He had gathered his own forces, legions of veteran soldiers, senators, allied kings, and mercenaries from 16 different kingdoms. It was a vast, seemingly invincible war machine, the full might of the Roman Empire arrayed for battle. They met Arthur's smaller army in the Valley of Saucy, a vast, open plain in Burgundy. The morning of the battle dawned, cold and gray. Two armies stood facing each other across a field that would soon be soaked in blood. On one side, the golden eagles of Rome, the symbol of order, power, and conquest, fluttering over endless, disciplined ranks of legionaries. On the other, the vibrant, chaotic banners of the Knights of Britain, the Pendragon standard at their center, a defiant dragon of red and gold. Emperor Lucius, clad in gilded armor, rode before his legions, promising them glory and the riches of a conquered Britain. And Arthur, astride his warhorse, moved before his men. He did not need to speak of gold or plunder. He held up his sword. Excalibur caught the first rays of the morning sun, and it blazed with a holy, terrifying light that seemed to push back the gray dawn. It was a light that shone in the eyes of every British warrior, a promise of a cause worth dying for. Arthur turned his horse to face the enemy, his gaze fixed on the golden eagle of the emperor. He raised the sword one final time, the signal to charge, its light a searing comet against the horizon. The horns of Camelot sounded a single, defiant note that echoed across the valley, and an entire kingdom surged forward as one. The clash was not of armies but of worlds. The dream of Camelot met the nightmare of its own making on a field of blood and mud. Arthur, at the head of the charge, was a force of nature. Excalibur was no longer just a king's scepter or a symbol of justice. It was an instrument of pure, terrible necessity. It rose and fell, a blur of impossible light, carving a path through the ranks of his own countrymen, men who had once knelt and called him sovereign. Each strike was a betrayal of his own ideals, a necessary evil to prevent a greater one. The sword, forged to unite, was now being used to tear apart the last vestiges of his kingdom. He fought not with the righteous fury of his youth, but with the grim, weary resolve of a man watching his life's work burn to the ground. Around him, the last of his round table knights fell. Sir Lucan, his shield splintered, his armor breached, fought on with the strength of 10 men. Sir Bedivere, loyal to the last, moved like a phantom at his king's side, a bulwark against the tide of treason. But for every traitor that fell, 2 more seemed to rise from the blood-soaked earth, their faces twisted with a desperate rage, their eyes mirroring the madness of their leader. The battlefield of Camelot was a maelstrom of chaos. The air, thick with the metallic tang of blood and the smoke of burning standards, rang with the screams of the dying. There was no glory here, no honor. There was only the grinding, brutal reality of civil war. Arthur's heart, a vessel that had once held the hopes of a nation, was now just a stone in his chest, heavy with grief. He saw the faces of men he had knighted, men who had shared his fire and his bread, now contorted in a final, agonizing snarl as Excalibur's light extinguished their own. The sword felt impossibly heavy, its divine purpose corrupted by this final fratricidal task. And then through the swirling chaos he saw him, Mordred, standing atop a mound of the dead, a dark silhouette against the bruised and weeping sky. He wore black armor, a twisted mockery of the silver plate of Camelot's knights. He held no shining, blessed sword, but a cruel, jagged blade that seemed to drink the light from the air. Their eyes met across the field of slaughter, and in that instant, the roar of battle faded to a dull hum. The world narrowed to two men, a father and a son, a king and his destroyer. This was the moment prophecy had foretold, the moment Arthur had spent a lifetime trying to outrun. Mordred offered a slow, cold smile, a smile that was a chilling echo of Morgan Le Fay, but with a poison all its own. He pointed his dark sword at Arthur, an invitation and a death sentence all in one. With a final sorrowful glance at the loyal Bedivere, Arthur spurred his horse forward. The final act had begun. He dismounted, his feet sinking into the mud that was now more blood than earth. He walked toward his son, Excalibur held low, its light a stark contrast to the encroaching twilight. The fighting around them seemed to part, creating a grim arena for the duel that would decide the fate of Britain. "It did not have to be this way," Arthur said, his voice a low rasp, raw with exhaustion and sorrow. Mordred laughed, a sound like grinding stone. "Didn't it, father? You built a kingdom on a lie, on a sword pulled from a stone. You spoke of justice and light, but you hid your own sins in the shadows. I am your sin returned. I am the truth of Camelot." Every word was a venomous dart, aimed at the cracks in Arthur's soul. He knew there was truth in the poison. Guinevere, Lancelot, the secrets and compromises that had slowly eroded the foundation of his perfect kingdom. Mordred was not just a usurper. He was a reckoning. "My sins are my own," Arthur replied, raising Excalibur. "But the kingdom, the dream, was for everyone. You would burn it all for nothing more than spite." "I would burn it to feel the warmth," Mordred hissed, and then he lunged. The clash of their swords was a shriek of tearing metal. Mordred fought with a wild, unpredictable fury, his dark blade a whirlwind of vicious strikes. He was younger, faster, fueled by a lifetime of hatred. He battered at Arthur's defenses, forcing the king to give ground. But Arthur was the master of combat. He parried and blocked, his movements economical and precise, a lifetime of battle etched into his muscle and bone. Excalibur was an extension of his will, a river of light that deflected the storm of Mordred's rage. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, they were perfectly matched. The light of Excalibur against the darkness of Mordred's blade. The dream of unity against the chaos of division. The father's regret against the son's revenge. They circled each other on the mound of corpses, their breath coming in ragged bursts. The setting sun cast their long dancing shadows across the field of the dead. But Arthur was wounded, not just by the long day's battle, but by the weight of his own heart. He saw not a monster before him, but the son he never knew, the twisted fruit of a forgotten sin. A moment's hesitation, a flicker of grief in his eyes, was all the opening Mordred needed. The dark blade slipped past Excalibur's guard, gouging a deep, cruel wound in Arthur's side. The king cried out, stumbling back, his hand flying to the gushing wound. The pain was immense, a fire that stole his breath. Mordred's eyes gleamed with triumph. He saw his victory. He saw the crown. He raised his sword for the final killing blow. But in that moment of arrogant triumph, he forgot who he was facing. He was facing the man who had pulled the sword from the stone, the king who had united a nation. He was facing Arthur Pendragon. With a final guttural roar that was equal parts agony and defiance, Arthur surged forward. He ignored the searing pain in his side, ignored the blood pouring down his leg. He drove himself onto Mordred's blade, impaling himself further, just to get close enough. Mordred's eyes widened in disbelief as Arthur's arms wrapped around him in a final fatal embrace. And with the last of his legendary strength, Arthur thrust Excalibur forward. There was no flash of divine light, no triumphant sound, just the sickening quiet sound of steel-piercing armor and flesh. The holy sword, which had been drawn to found a kingdom, was now buried to the hilt in the heart of the king's own son. Mordred shuddered, a look of profound shock on his face. The hatred drained from his eyes, replaced by a hollow, childlike confusion. He looked down at the glowing blade protruding from his chest. then back up at his father's face. He whispered a single word, a question, a curse, or perhaps a plea, before his strength failed him and he collapsed, pulling his own sword free from Arthur's side as he fell. Arthur stood for a moment, swaying, the world dissolving into a red-tinted blur. He watched his son die on a bed of slaughtered knights. The prophecy was fulfilled. The victor and the vanquished were one and the same. Then, his own strength gave out, and he fell to his knees, Excalibur clattering from his numb fingers onto the bloody ground beside him. The light of the legendary sword seemed to dim, as if mourning the king it had served. The battle was over. The silence that fell over Camelot was more terrible than the screams had been. It was the silence of a dead kingdom. Sir Bedivere, his face a mask of horror, rushed to his king's side. He tore a strip from his own cloak, trying desperately to staunch the flow of blood from the grievous wound. "My king," he wept. "My king, what have you done?" Arthur looked up, his eyes glassy, his breath shallow. He looked past Bedivere, at the field littered with the bodies of his friends and his enemies, indistinguishable in death. "It is done," he whispered. "The dream is over." He coughed and blood flecked his lips. He knew his time was short. The wound was mortal. He reached out a trembling hand, not to Bedivere, but to the sword lying in the mud. "Bedivere," he commanded, his voice a faint echo of its former power. "My last and most loyal knight, you must do one final thing for me. Take Excalibur." His fingers brushed the hilt. "Take my sword, and throw it back into the lake. Return it from whence it came. Do not fail me in this." Bedivere stared, his eyes wide with confusion and disbelief. "Throw it away? Excalibur? The soul of Britain? The last shining remnant of Camelot's glory? To cast it into the dark, silent water seemed a greater treason than anything Mordred had ever conceived. How could he obey? The command was a dagger to the heart of everything he had ever fought for. To throw away the light of the world as the darkness closed in? It was madness. It was sacrilege. Arthur, his breath coming in ragged gasps, saw the conflict raging in his last knight's eyes. "Do as I command," the king whispered, his voice a ghost of its former power. "My time is short. The fate of the sword is the fate of the kingdom." Reluctantly, Sir Bedivere took the hilt. The familiar weight in his hand was no longer a comfort, but a terrible burden. He turned and limped away from his dying king, moving towards the shore of the vast, still lake. The path was shrouded in mist, each step a torment. He held Excalibur aloft, and even in the gloom, it seemed to create its own light. The hilt, a masterpiece of gold and silver, was encrusted with jewels that shimmered like a captured constellation. The blade itself, forged in dragon's fire and tempered with spells lost to time, hummed with a low, ancient power. How could he cast such a treasure, such a history, into the cold, unfeeling depths? It was the last vestige of Camelot. To destroy it would be to admit, finally and irrevocably, that all was lost. He reached the water's edge and stood there, paralyzed. He could not do it. He would not. Instead, he carefully hid the magnificent sword among the reeds and rushes, concealing its otherworldly gleam beneath the mundane foliage. He returned to Arthur, his face a mask of feigned obedience. The king, his eyes closed, asked, "What did you see?" Bedivere, his voice hollow, lied, "My lord, I saw nothing but the wind upon the waves and the water lapping on the shore." Arthur's eyes snapped open, and in them was not weakness, but a fire of profound disappointment. "You have lied to me," he rasped. "That is a traitor's answer. You have betrayed me for the love of a beautiful thing. Go now, go again, and do not fail me, for my life depends on your haste." Shamed, Bedivere turned without a word and went back to the lake. The guilt was a physical weight, heavier than his armor, heavier than the shield he no longer carried. He retrieved Excalibur from the reeds, its beauty now seeming to mock him. He thought of the battles it had won, the justice it had served. He thought of the kingdom it had built. To throw it away was to discard the hope of a future Britain ever rising from these ashes. Surely it was better to preserve this symbol, to keep it for a future generation, for a new king who might one day be worthy. His duty to the future, he reasoned, outweighed his duty to a dying man's strange request. Once more his resolve failed him. He found a hollow beneath the roots of an ancient willow tree and laid the sword within. covering it with moss and fallen leaves. He hurried back to Arthur, his heart pounding with the weight of his second betrayal. "What did you see?" the king demanded, his voice weaker now but sharper. Bedivere repeated his lie. "My lord, I saw nothing but the reeds whispering and the ripples on the water." A terrible groan escaped Arthur's lips. He struggled to push himself up on one elbow, his face pale and slick with the sweat of his final effort. "Ah, traitor! Unkind and untrue! Twice you have betrayed me. You have put me in great peril, for I have taken a mortal cold from your delay. Who would have thought that you, my most trusted knight, would value a jeweled sword above your king's final command and the safety of the realm? Now go again. But if you fail me this third time, I swear by my life, I will rise from this ground and I will slay you with my own hands." The threat, coming from the broken body of his king, struck Bedivere with the force of a physical blow. All his rationalizations, all his selfish justifications, crumbled into dust. He saw not just a dying man, but the vessel of Britain's soul, and he had failed it. He had failed him. He ran. He did not limp, he did not walk. He ran to the lake, his armor clattering, his lungs burning. He snatched Excalibur from its hiding place, and this time, he did not allow himself to look at it. He shut his eyes tight, spun on his heel, and with a great cry that was half grief and half penance, he hurled the legendary sword with all his remaining strength out over the water. It flew in a great glittering arc against the gray sky. A flash of silver and gold, a trail of fading light. For a moment it seemed to hang at the apex of its flight, a final brilliant star in a dying world. Then it began to fall. But before the blade could touch the surface of the lake, a miracle occurred. The water broke, but not with a splash. An arm clothed in a sleeve of pure white samite rose from the depths. A hand, ethereal and graceful, caught the falling sword by its hilt. It was the Lady of the Lake, come to reclaim what was hers. The hand brandished Excalibur 3 times, shaking it in the air as if in a final silent salute to the age of heroes. Then with a slow, deliberate grace, the arm and the sword sank back beneath the waves. The water swirled once, and then the lake was as still and silent as it had been before, as if nothing had ever happened. Bedivere stared, breathless, his mind reeling. He fell to his knees, the truth of Arthur's command finally crashing down upon him. It was not an end but a return, a promise fulfilled. He scrambled back to his king, tears streaming down his face. "My lord," he cried, "I have done as you commanded." I saw an arm clothed in white samite rise from the water. It caught the sword, brandished it 3 times, and drew it beneath the waves. A faint smile touched Arthur's lips. A look of peace settled over his tormented features. "You have seen true," he whispered. "Now help me. Carry me to the water's edge, for my end is near." With infinite care, Bedivere lifted his king, the once mighty frame now feeling as fragile as a bird's. He carried him to the shore, and there, waiting silently in the mist, was a black barge. On its deck stood 3 queens draped in dark hoods, their faces pale with sorrow. Among them, Bedivere recognized Morgan Le Fay, Arthur's half-sister and so often his nemesis, now here to mourn his passing. They wept as Bedivere laid the king gently upon the barge. "Ah, my brother," Morgan said, taking his head in her lap, "you have been too long in coming." Arthur looked up at his last loyal knight. "I go now," he said, his voice barely audible, "to the Vale of Avalon to be healed of my grievous wound. If you hear of me no more, pray for my soul." Bedivere fell to his knees on the cold stones of the shore, his voice choked with grief. "But my lord Arthur, what will become of me, now that you are gone, and I am left here alone among my enemies?" Arthur's final words drifted back from the departing barge, a whisper of hope across the water. "Comfort yourself. Do as well as you may, for in me is no trust for to trust in. I must into the Vale of Avalon, for I will come again, when the land has need of me." The barge slid away into the mist, a phantom ship carrying the last great king of Britain into legend. Bedivere watched until it was completely gone, leaving him utterly alone on the shore as a new, colder dawn began to break. The age of magic was over. The sword was gone. The king was gone. But the legend was only just beginning. Excalibur was not just a sword of the past, but a symbol of the future. A promise sleeping in the quiet depths, that a righteous leader, A just cause and a time of heroes will one day return. The story of the sword is the story of hope itself, a light waiting in the darkness, for the hand worthy enough to draw it forth once more.